everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm going to share a little bit about the task team and the format for today's discussion, and then introduce our esteemed presenters. So the GPC task team on cash for protection came into being in 2017. And as I mentioned, it's co-chaired by WRC and IRC. We're 50 members strong at this point across 30 different agencies, including implementing agencies and donors. Membership is open, so if your organization is not yet a member, you're most welcome to be in touch, and I'll put my email in the chat a bit later on. We focus on using CVA to achieve protection outcomes across all areas of responsibility, and our objectives are to strengthen coordination, generate evidence, develop, endorse, and roll out guidance, tools, and trainings to build capacity on using CVA for protection outcomes. And every other month during our regular task team calls, we reserve time for members to share experiences. We call these thematic discussions of using CVA for protection outcomes. And these discussions among peers are really meant to be quote unquote safe space for honest dialogue, to share promising practice, to highlight practical programming and operational challenges, and to share learning and exchange solutions for where we bump up against the wall when we're using CVA for protection outcomes. So today we're trying out a slightly different format, bringing these discussions out of the regular task team meeting to have an elongated format and to allow more space for discussion. So today we're going to have a 20-minute presentation followed by 40 minutes of discussion with Q&A. So please do drop your questions into the chat throughout the presentation, and I will help funnel your questions and facilitate dialogue at the end with our presenters. So today, we are going to focus on the joint CWG-GBV task force, which was established for the Northwest Syria response at the end of 2020. The task force meets regularly and offers a forum for CVA and GBV actors to discuss initiatives aiming to improve the use of cash to enhance GBV prevention and response. The main outputs of the task force to date are the cash GBV SOPs that will be discussed today, and I'll drop the link shortly into the chat so you can have that for reference. The SOPs guide the use of CVA and GBV case management and the GBV risk analysis on the use of CVA in Northwest Syria. So we have three presenters today. Our first is Faye Kagastian. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. She is a senior cash and markets advisor for the whole of Syria response. She's held this role since 2018, and she is an interagency resource deployed by CashCap and NORCAP to support multiple stakeholders across the regional response hubs for Syria, including cash working groups. She comes to share with us from 20 years of professional experience in development, humanitarian context in the field of financial inclusion, cash programming, policy development, and coordination. We also are happy to have join us today Alexia Neeson, who is a GBV consultant for UNFPA Turkey Cross-Border Syria. She's held this position since April 2021 and is in charge of both supervising the UNFPA GBV program and leading the GBV subcluster. She has over 10 years of professional experience in the field of protection and GBV in humanitarian contexts, including 6 years in the Syria crisis response. And last but not least, by any means, Ola Bata has 8 years of experience in humanitarian intervention in conflict-affected countries, managing emergency and cash responses together with different donors, INGOs, and local NGOs. Cash interventions have been done for different winterization, protection, shelter. Ola has an MA in political science and a thesis addressing SMEs, the role of SMEs in Syrian conflict. And she's recently been co-leading the Cash GBV task force together with the GBV subcluster and Cash working group. So without further ado, I will turn over to our presenters who will speak collectively for a total of around 20 minutes. Then we will open it up for Q&A. And again, feel free to drop your questions as they pop up in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. Colleagues, over to you.
Thanks, Tenzin. I'm just going to turn on my camera for a bit to say hi and turn it off now.
Thanks so much. You're also a little quiet, if you don't mind speaking up or coming to your mic.
Okay, thanks.
That's much better. Thanks.
Yeah, great. So for today, we're showing you what we're going to share with you in the 20 minutes. We'll give you a genesis of how the task force, the joint task force, was developed. We'll share some enabling factors, lessons, and good practices, and then we'll hand it over to our GBV colleague, GBV subcluster colleague.
I can't hear you.
To show you the key components of the SOP and have some reflection points to share with you. Can you hear me now? Is this better?
Yes, thank you. You dropped for just a second, please, for me. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, and then we'll have some discussion. But before we proceed, I just want to make one quick point, which is that the SOPs has just been developed. So we have a lot of work to do. But yeah, this is, I think the process itself and how we got here, it might be interesting for other colleagues on the call. And the last point is I want to thank our national NGO partners who I'm glad to see here. You will be hearing from them hopefully in the discussions later as well. So let's proceed to the next slide. To look at a quick look at the background. So a number of points to share with you is, the cash working group, started seeing a number of partners doing, including GBV cases in, MPC. Let me just, the acronyms for these are a bit onerous, so let me try to to say what they are. The cash and voucher assistance actors, basically the members of the cash working group, they've started, including, GBV cases in their multi-purpose cash projects that, when we started to see more and more of this, we, as coordinators, we were a bit concerned. So on the other side of, on the other side as well, when we started engaging with our GBV subcluster colleagues, they're, in fact, they've been using cash at a small scale to support cases, case management. But there's always a limited budget, and the capacity is limited as well. So yes, and then mutually and formally in the beginning, we realized we need to really have some framework to interface. Bilaterally as well, we're having discussions with donors bilaterally and on the technical experts on cash sitting in donor offices are telling us, well, how do you, how can you be targeting GBV cases? Well, how much, do you know about GBV case management and all that? And then on the other side, bilaterally, the donors also funding GBV programming are also wondering, like, how is this coordinated? So, this kind of made it really easy for us to really get together. To the next slide, please. Hello. Yeah, thank you. So a few other enabling factors externally. This discussion has been going on since 2019. We had a workshop on cash for rent, but it was a well-attended interagency workshop. Our GBV colleagues were there, the cash working group colleagues were there. And even though the subject was cash for rent, this is a modality we don't recommend as a cash working group in our context for a lot of reasons. But one of the recommendations at the end of it was perhaps we could do a small pilot for GBV cases. So that's one enabling factor, and what brought us together. The other thing too is that around the same time, the cash working group had a strategic priority to reach out to clusters. Clusters are always busy. The sector coordination bodies are always overwhelmed. So, you know, as a strategic priority, we thought like, let's go to them. Let's, you know, support, you know, like proactively engage with them. So, and that's what brought us to the to our wonderful colleagues in the GBV subcluster. And then of course on their side, there, you know, we know, you know, the statistics are really alarming. For our context, there were rising GBV cases with, you know, and then in our context that is quite complex. The needs are massive. And then of course the GBV subcluster's efforts to strengthen the referral pathways, which led them to develop a cash and voucher assistance in case management guidance note. To the next slide, please. So what are the lessons and good practices? On the left-hand side, the lesson, one key lesson for us is, you know, we really needed to understand each other and build trust between cash actors and GBV and protection actors, because without understanding what we do, we couldn't build that trust. And so the task force, actually, just to quick point on this, is made up of, you know, equally of GBV protection actors and you know, our colleagues who have experience in case management, and then on, you know, equally as well, you know, the same organizations, cash and voucher experts were also part of the task force. So we're able to educate each other mutually. And then of course there's a need to establish common procedures and a framework just to engage with each other and to really tackle where our interface is. And yeah, and it brings us to that question, where's the starting point for us? How do we really systematize the interface between these two actors who are, you know, who are really key in supporting GBV cases through cash and voucher assistance? Some of the good practices we had through the task force, we did have, we didn't start working right away on the SOPs. We had sessions to sensitize each party on what each party is doing. We had, you know, cash working group members who were there, learned, you know, I learned a lot, certainly, about case management. And then on the other side, you know, our colleagues also, you know, supporting GBV programming, also learned about how, you know, the intricacies of cash transfer programming. And the establishment of the, well, of course, one good practice is the establishment of this task force, this joint task force. I think this is, you know, really a key, because without it, we wouldn't have been able to develop the SOPs. Of course, it was important for us to have the national NGO be part of it. We had simultaneous translations in every meeting so that we're inclusive in the way we communicate with each other, and we don't, you know, we don't miss out on some key points. And then we developed a one-pager, which I think in the link you will see as well, on how to use the SOPs, and you know, we had key recommendations there to all stakeholders, including, you know, cluster coordinators, of course, you know, senior management at every agency, and donors as well. And lastly, we started replicating this framework, that the establishment of a task force in another hub within the whole of Syria response in Northeast Syria. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then now I hand it over to Alexia to show us some of the key components of the SOPs for your consideration. Over to you, Alexia.
Thank you so much, Faye, for sharing the background of the GBV cash collaboration. Just before starting, I would like to acknowledge the outstanding contribution from the GBV side of our UNFP, Rim Ramis. She's currently on maternity leave, but she has joined us today. So hello to you, Rim. She has really been the one putting so much efforts and dedication in this collaboration together with Faye and partners colleagues. So just to mention. All right, so one of the main outputs of the joint task force to date are indeed the CV SOPs, as we call them. The SOPs acknowledge that CVA can constitute a vital component of GBV case management, and they provide a frame and parameters for the referral of survivors and persons at risk of GBV to CVA partners. So the referral can take place within the same organization, for instance, between protection and CVA departments, but also externally from a GBV organization to another organization providing CVA. The SOPs themselves are divided into 7 main sections that you see on the slides. First of all, the SOP's objectives, then the prerequisite for the SOP's implementation. We have a traditional section on definition of technical terms, such as informed consent, rights holder, etc. Definition of roles and responsibilities between the GBV actors and the CVA partners. We have a section on the steps of the selection of CVA recipients and the referral process. Then comes the financial eligibility assessment and related CVA response options, and eventually a section on documentation and information sharing. Those 7 sections are followed by 3 annexes that you see here. First of all, a simple memorandum of understanding to, let's say, organize, formalize a pre-arranged partnership between the GBV actor in charge of case management and a CVA partner. Then a risk management matrix, that's actually a very good practice. It captures the key GBV protection PSEA risks related to the use of CVA in Northwest Syria, and of course the related possible mitigation measures. And then eventually the main resources at global level, at field level that have been used and mobilized to develop those SOPs. So for the sake of time and because the SOPs are online, focus the presentation elements with the most questions, namely the steps of the selection of the CVA recipients and the referral to CVA, as well as the eligibility assessment and the CVA response options. Thank you, Joanna. So let's start with the basic steps of the recipient selection and referral to CVA partners. How does that work in practice? Who does what in this process? So step 1, you see it in the orange circle on the top of the slide. It's the GBV actor as part of the case management process who will assess the case vulnerability and conduct the financial eligibility assessment. This assessment will focus on socioeconomic aspects to determine the eligibility for cash assistance. We've been talking earlier with Faye about the necessary trust and mutual understanding between GBV and CVA actors for the collaboration to work out. The fact that the GBV actors basically ask the CVA partner to rely on the eligibility assessment is a really good example of that. Obviously, the reason from the GBV side is to uphold the survivor-centered approach and to avoid submitting survivors to external parties asking questions that are related to the situation or the violence they have endured. Step 2, if you follow the arrow, the GBV actor refers then the case assessed as eligible and recommended for CVA to the GBV focal point of the CVA partner. This will be done as per SOPs and regional referral pathways. In other terms, the referral will take place after full information is provided to the survivor and informed consent obtained. The step 3, following referrals, the CVA partner provides immediate feedback to the GBV actor. Usually, of course, this feedback is supposed to be positive based on the assessment that was done and on the GBV actor's knowledge on the CVA options. But it might be cases where the CVA partner has completed the cycle of CVA, for instance, or has specific additional criteria for certain types of CVA options. So the CVA partner will provide feedback to the GBV actor. Then step 4, if you follow, then the GBV actor informs the CVA nominee to develop with him or her a case action planning, including then the provision of cash assistance. And here comes the last step. The CVA partner delivers then the assistance, and while doing so, he will take into account the necessary GBV risk mitigation measures. And here we can make reference to the Annex 2 of the SOPs, if you remember the risk management matrix. That can also be a guide for the CVA colleagues. So you see on the slide that there is an arrow between the step 5, the assistance delivery, and the step 1 again, the assessment. This is intentional, and this is to illustrate that the vulnerability and the needs of a person at risk or a survivor might evolve over time, and therefore it might require mobilization of different CVA options over time. Then, following the assistance delivery, the GBV actor will lead what we call PDM, the post-distribution monitoring. This is really the following phase that comes after the step of service provision that we have just described. It's not on the slide itself. The PDM tool will be jointly developed by GBV actor and CVA partner to make sure that it captures information that are relevant for both actors. And as well, the SOPs recommend a joint analysis of the PDM findings, obviously using non-identifiable data, to ensure quality CVA referrals pathways to GBV survivors. Joanna, you can proceed to the next slide, please. And we will go to the section related to the financial eligibility assessment and the CVA response, the step 1. That is probably one of the most critical steps, and we can explore a little bit more in depth the assessment and the possible CVA response options. We've discussed already that the assessment will be conducted by the GBV actor as part of the case management. If need be, the CVA partner can also support with additional questions to make sure that CVA eligibility priorities are also well captured. The idea of the assessment is to contextualize a little bit the incident reported and assess the survivor's needs for CVA with a specific attention and understanding of their access to resources, their control over resources. And this is to understand how potentially the lack or the limited access or control over resources might undermine the CVA benefits. So I have to mention that the detailed modalities of the assessments are not part as such of these SOPs. The SOPs rely on some reference resources or know well. This protocol is extremely useful. It's a step-by-step guide for GBV actors to consider all aspects related to the needs and relevance of CVA in case management, as well as possible negative consequences in given case. So now what the SOPs have been trying to do is to be, let's say, pragmatic and to rely on the types of cases that GBV actors are encountering on their daily work. So a very practical table has been developed, linking as a matter of illustration the eligibility criteria with the guidance regarding the response time and the relevant CVA option and the response priority for each type of case. So you'll see on the slide some examples illustrating 3 levels of priority. So the first example is a right holder facing a life-threatening issue. For instance, severe physical violence, sexual violence, and he or she has no access to financial resources to support immediate life-saving interventions. So there, what the SOPs recommend is immediate referral to another GBV actor if the GBV case manager cannot provide CVA for one-off cash assistance within 24 to 48 hours. So here, the most relevant response that has been identified by the SOPs is for GBV programming through case management. The second example, unfortunately quite common in our context, is the imminent risk of early marriage, as we know that child marriage is used as a negative coping mechanism to alleviate financial burden. There, the SOPs recommend a financial eligibility assessment, as we discussed earlier, and a referral to GBV partner for one-off cash or to CVA partner if multiple rounds of cash or longer-term options are recommended for this precise case. And this should be done within 1 week to 2 weeks. The third example that are taken from the SOPs is the example of a survivor of domestic violence that has benefited from case management already, is now, for instance, relocated out of immediate risk, but in need of support to establish livelihood, for instance, and support her household. In that case, the SOPs recommend a financial eligibility assessment and a referral to CVA partner for longer term option within 1 to 2 weeks, again, for the time frame. So this is what the SOPs provide in terms of guidance for the assessment and response options. And this is how the SOPs proceed. So for additional elements of the SOPs and the annexes, please feel free to consult the document online. It's a public document. The document has always also been posted on the GBV AOR and on the humanitarian response site. And of course, all questions in this Q&A or afterwards to Faye and I bilaterally after the sessions are welcome. Now, building on the SOPs, Faye will describe for us the way forward for the task force and mention a few points of reflection.
Thanks, Alexia. Just a quick check. Can everybody hear me?
Hey, we can't hear you very well. Sorry, if you could
Thanks.
a little louder.
Yeah, so like I said in the beginning, we have a lot of work to do, and these are just some of them. So we will have to jointly roll out the SOPs from Northwest Syria through the cross-border response, and also in Northeast Syria. Hopefully, in the coming months, it will kick off. We definitely need to actively document not just the case studies and the success stories, the journey of maybe GBV survivor perhaps that benefited from a more facilitated, more systematic response to support them. And yeah, it's a document in progress. Of course, it will benefit from the experience. We will continue improving upon it. But I think the next bullet here is quite important. I think while we roll this out, we could also talk in our task force about organizing a capacity building, a learning event to continue exchanging the experiences and the lessons as they happen, so we could course correct as they happen. And I think thematic discussions such as this help a lot as well. But I think we need to do more through the different clusters we have. This is something that I think is if we really want to roll this out, we need to do this as a thematic discussion in as many sectors and clusters as we can. And lastly, last couple of points, like we've already mentioned, we're replicating this. I think the task force establishment is one easy step. I mean, easy quote unquote step, but it's a very definitive starting point. And then we'll continue to adjust our common messages and develop some more advocacy efforts towards our stakeholders. Last slide, please. So I call these reflection points, but actually some of these were our sticking points when we were in our task force meetings as we were starting to develop the SOPs. So the first one being, and we will learn about this as it's rolled out. I think I'm going to be looking forward to how the response options analysis would happen and whether there would be GBV actors or case managers, for example, reaching out to CVA or cash and voucher assistance colleagues to help them with deciding which modality of cash and vouchers would be appropriate for any given case, whether it's a 24-hour to 72-hour response time, or a more a longer window of time to support, like 6 months, because we have different modalities for cash and vouchers with different requirements to set up as well. So it would be interesting for us to see how this actually operationally works out between the two parties. Same with monitoring and reporting. I mean, I think one of the sticking points was who's going to do the post-distribution monitoring. And we had a lot of discussions over this, because, of course, each actor have donor requirements, right? They have to share, findings from their PDMs, and, cash actors have, a lot of scrutiny from all stakeholders. So that's one of something that we will look forward to, how that actually plays out operationally. And of course, the community engagement and accountability. This is so important, obviously, especially for, GBV survivors and, girls and women at risk. While we want to protect their identity and their cases, and so how do we grapple with the need to also engage the community and be accountable that we're supporting this group that is so underserved. And then, of course, closing the feedback loop again, like how do we share those information? How do we balance that tension between protecting identities and at the same time making sure that we don't miss the opportunity to hear about the feedback, especially for cash implementing partners. This is also important, because we need, if there are processes that we do when we're delivering the cash that puts the recipient at risk, we need to hear about it so we can improve that. But would our information sharing protocols allow for such kinds of exchange of information? And then I guess encapsulating all of these reflection points, we would definitely watch out for when the case management capacity is underdeveloped, and in some areas, at minimum, what should CVA and GBV, cash voucher assistance actors and gender-based violence actors do at minimum together or jointly? And with that, I want to actually ask our colleague Ola to give us, before we open for Q&A, and apologies for the time that we're spending on together, but I don't think we met the 20-minute mark. But Ola, if you could, Ola is our colleague from Shafak, and I see that we have our colleague from our national NGOs, Ihsan, as well, who are here, and I hope to be able to hear from them also in the Q&A. But Ola could give us perhaps just a quick point on how Shafak as a both a cash, a CVA implementing and protection programming implementing partner is able to benefit from the SOPs as it stands right now. Ola, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Faye. I hope that I wouldn't take more than also 5 minutes, because I know that we actually preceded the 20 minutes given to us. So starting from the first point, when we were developing this SOP, it was for the cash partners, CBA partners, and GBV partners. And as Shafak has both CBA department for conducting cash activities and protection, and specifically GBV department, it was actually the best practice for us to start internally this kind of integration. While the SOP actually was developed, we started the discussion with our GBV department about how we can integrate together. And the first response between us and them actually was conducted 3 months ago during the development of the SOP. The major steps actually that we worked on and we benefited from the SOP through were the assessment phase, where the GBV actors were more able actually to conduct the assessment and purely give us, can you hear us? Okay, and give us the pure results of what are the major needs for these households. Honestly, the assessment was not developed as it is now in the SOP itself. I mean, divided on the eligibility criteria and divided on the levels and steps of the support needed. But I think that now with the SOP, we're better able to address more needs of this, because before the SOP was developed, our support was all one-off to be for the domestic violence affected people. And we developed only on one level of the assessment or financial assessment, which was also conducted by the GBV people. The next step actually that was where the GBV people had more trust with us to build was where they referred the results to us, and we were actually checking on not only the applicability or feasibility of conducting this response, but also we were checking on the feasibility of the cash intervention itself, where we have the market assessment that was done for the suggested cases and suggested areas. And we also had inputs for the GBV people of whether this cash would be in place or not. The actually next steps that we worked on were a bit, I can say, difficult, and they needed more efforts from GBV and cash people, because also for us, I mean, as field team, it was a bit hard for CBA people to understand why we need to integrate together with the GBV and where are the areas that we needed to integrate together. So, for example, the orientation sessions that were done also by the GBV people to the cash, and the definition of the terms for the cash people, like who are the GBV affected cases, what does it mean to have rights holder, what does it mean to have confidentiality, informed consent. All of these were in need actually to be clarified for the CBA people in order also to proceed forward, and in order to keep, you know, the major principles needed for the GBV cases in order to be aligned with the SOP. The collaboration between us actually and the GBV staff inside Shafaq is still ongoing and still actually under development. But mainly what we had benefited from the SOP and which is now under development is the capacity assessment, including the financial eligibility assessment. As I mentioned earlier, this was not actually the case where we were dealing with, where you can say more of a standard assessment, one of cash was given to these cases. But now with this different levels of assessment, the GBV people are working more on developing questions and tools which are related to each type of level in order to provide us with the right information. The information sharing and the approach of only need to know information to be collected by CBA people and our staff is still a bit difficult to apply. And for this reason, it is still also under development, where we are also based on the SOP. And thanks for the colleagues for highlighting this point. In addition, actually, to the advocacy, because we think that advocacy for these cases is very important part, but unfortunately, since CBA and GBV people were not integrated before, and I can say that the relationship between the GBV and the lack of access to cash, it was not clarified so much, was a major reason behind, you know, the lack of advocacy messages. And this is one of the areas that we're working on during our responses. Currently, unfortunately, we have a plan actually to intervene in 3 camps of GBV cases. And together with the protection and GBV team, we're developing actually the steps according to the SOP. And as Faye mentioned, we're also in the phase of collecting the feedback about this SOP, where we are going to put it in and then see how we are going to proceed forward. I hope this was not so long. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. We have a few questions so far. So one is, this is from Holly at Care. How did you all address issues that come up when focusing on survivors who are adolescents? And I would add, and also, how have you tackled addressing the needs at the SOP stage for other marginalized populations, such as LGBTI survivors? You mentioned before the capacity level of GBV service providers, and I would be curious to also hear from you on other populations as well. Over to you.
All right, maybe I can step in and say a word related to the first part of the question, related to adolescents or minors in general. There is a little section in the SOPs, just to clarify the question, basically, can a child be a recipient of cash? Because it's a very, let's say, legitimate question. The answer in the SOPs is that indeed, in certain circumstances, when a survivor is under 18 and satisfied the criteria for cash assistance, this one is identical to the assessment we would do for an adult, then a minor under 18 can be eligible to receive CVA without necessarily an adult supervision, would it be the parents or the caregivers, etc. And this is great in cases where we have, for example, an imminent risk of child marriage, for instance, as I mentioned as an example, where actually engaging parents can be counterproductive in this case. Everything that is done will be done, obviously, in the best interest of the child and to the extent possible in line with the child protection SOPs. So in general, of course, we proceed with permission and consent from the caregivers and parents, but where cases arise where it's actually counterproductive or simply impossible, then cash can be given only to the adolescent girls in the case of child marriage, for instance, always based on the assessment from the case management side. I hope this clarified the question.
Thanks so much. That's certainly very helpful. And others, I don't know if you're able to speak to my kind of second part that I injected into Holly's question. You were talking about, the capacity level of GBV service providers being a prerequisite or certainly enabling factor to using cash within GBV prevention and response. And from other settings, I'm curious, how you've tackled potential issues of LGBTI plus competency among service providers to be able to be inclusive of this population. So anyone who would like to tackle that question, if you can.
Should I continue?
I'm not that. Yeah, I think that's something that our GBV protection colleagues can tackle better than the cash working group folks.
Absolutely. I think this is a very interesting question, also because simply from, and maybe Ola can complement from like a field perspective, I think this is also a capacity development work in process that we should be doing to ensure that all the GBV risk mitigation measures are in place and that there is no, let's say, a breach when it comes to a survivor-centered approach, regardless the profile of the survivor that is referred. So this is really extremely important. And I think It's also our accountability from the GBV side to include in the referral pathways service providers, let's say, in which we know that sufficient sensitization and capacity development have been done to welcome these particular populations. And it's, I mean, you mentioned LGBTI, there are others, obviously. We can talk about persons with disabilities, older women. We can talk about even adolescent girls can be considered as a more challenging population to handle. So this is really something that we pay attention on. Ola, from a field perspective, do you have anything to add from your own experience?
Can you hear us?
Yes, please go ahead.
Actually, as I mentioned, from field perspective, the major issue for our team that was not developed before, and now we're working on, in order to align it, first of all, with the SOP, and then collect feedback also about how far this is applicable, you know, in the field, is dividing the assessment according to the eligibility and putting specific inputs according to each, let's say, eligibility criteria. I can admit actually that this is not easy to be applicable in this phase, because still we are, I mean, we're having difficulties, you know, in identifying the exact risk directly and identifying the reasons behind them. And if, for example, they are affecting other members of the family or not, because I think that I'm not going to elaborate on this more. This is GBV purely effort people. But then for the CVA people, the major difficulty is all the time, okay, if we receive, for example, that the case is according to, let's say, the category number 7, or category, let's say, number 8, where multiple responses is needed. In this case, actually, we were coming to a point that how far we have the resources to do this. And it is a bit of difficult area, because at the end, we have also the methods process, and we need, you know, to align our responses with our donors. Still, it is not fully applicable, and we're actually trying to find solutions for this. But I think that advocacy at this stage, and our respective actually colleagues and entities who are here, and they can hear us, they can support this more by the designing phase of the projects. I mean, when we are talking about cash for protection or for GBV cases, it is very important to address that this is not only one level of response, and it has different levels. So we need actually to take into consideration that in the design of programs, we need this to be reflected so that we have, let's say, more access to sources. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned advocacy, and Holly also asked, multiple presenters mentioned advocacy. Can you elaborate a little bit more? What type of advocacy and to whom? What messages do you feel like are key to get out and make sure that they land to support this work?
I'll
to take the question
on this maybe, and then pass it on to Alexia and any also our national partners. So there's multiple levels, and if you look at that's one of the reasons we developed a one-pager, basically with recommendations to each and every stakeholder. So, you know, we have recommendations for the individual agencies. We have recommendations for the donors. For us, I think you know, the advocacy, I think this is one of the reasons why we are sharing this with you, to be honest, is because you know, the link that we made, the connections that we made between these two actors who didn't used to understand each other, but now understand a bit better. Obviously, we still have a lot of work to do in understanding what we do. it's just a starting point, and we have we hope to continue discussions and have updates for you. But I think the process of having a platform for the two actors who have their bilateral, we all have bilateral discussions with our donors. The donors themselves within their organizations have, protection TAs and cash TAs, and so we need to just, this is just a starting point for us. I think I want to emphasize that it's not, and we don't know yet what issues it will solve, but I think as a starting point, having everyone in the room supporting each other, understanding what case management is from the side of the cash actors, GPV case managers, understanding where, how cash actors can support them in response options analysis. That's where we start. And I think in many contexts that we've all been in, we're all doing everything in silos, and we're not talking to each other. And I think this is what we're really trying to share here, to start with. Alexia, anyone else want to add in terms of advocacy?
Yeah, thank you, Faye. I can build on what you were saying. Actually, I obviously totally agree, but just underline that we are lucky enough to have some resources at global level, regional level, Northwest Syria level that have been developed that we can use and we can mobilize in our advocacy. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of the cash and voucher assistance, and GBV violence compendium is one, definitely. We also have the risk management metrics that we had developed, and the one pager that we developed at our level, as we mentioned. So we can definitely mobilize that. And yes, it's an ongoing advocacy as well for the agencies, for example, delivering large-scale CVA to, get them be an active part of the work of the task force, where they will be ongoingly sensitized on certain issues, as well as the big opportunity for us will be definitely the rollout of the SOPs. We still have to proceed with that. It will be done jointly, and we're going to have a TOT and a training plan at Turkey level, in the field level. So it will be definitely a great opportunity for us to again outreach to senior management level, field level, to pass some key messages. But this is definitely something that we keep in mind and we prioritize in the work of the task force. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we have to close, but I'll ask one last question. You mentioned at the beginning and throughout the importance of building trust and creating common understanding around each other's approaches amongst cash and GBV actors and their respective goals and approaches. And you flagged capacity building is also really key. You mentioned, terms and confidentiality and survivor-centered approach, but can you elaborate briefly what you see as other critical capacity building needs?
Faye, would you start on that?
Alexia, do you wanna? I think you were in the last meeting of the subcluster that I attended. You were talking about capacity building, so I'll give it to you, and then I'll add a few things. And maybe we can also.
It sounds good.
Yeah, maybe we can also ask our national partners, national NGOs at their level as well, what capacity building they would appreciate. Over.
All right. Yes, let me start on that one then to give the GBV perspective and the GBV cash perspective maybe. So definitely, I mean, capacity development is one of our priorities at the GBV subcluster level and at the joint task force level. It's extremely key, and to make sure that we keep in touch basically with the evolving needs in the field, we are proceeding regularly to the updates of the capacity development plan that we have. And very recently, actually this month, to mark the end of the midterm review, let's say, of our achievements versus of the remaining needs, we have developed a survey with the different partners, and we had almost 40 partners actually engaged in GBV as well as engaged in GBV and CVA, replying on their main needs of capacity development. And it's in line with what we mentioned already in the presentation. Needs remain when it comes to case management, GBV case management, and advanced case management. And by advanced case management, I mean management of cases that are particularly challenging due to the complexity of the case or due to the profile of the survivors, actually. And the need to reinforce again the referral pathways and the knowledge around the referral pathways and how to make referrals safer for GBV survivors, including referring to cash. And then there is the capacity development plan that we are in process of developing with the different actors that will allow us to really roll out the SOPs in the field. I would say bottom up, or certainly because some sensitization needs to be done as well with the heads of departments within different organizations and with management, just to make sure that the approach is well understood and to contribute to build trust. So yes, I'll happily hand over to Ola and Faye for any complementary comments. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Yeah, actually, the major point that I would like to highlight here in terms of referral pathways is, capacity building is the referral pathways, specifically for the cash response staff, where I think that okay, now I'm going actually to speak from the ground, specifically what's happening and how we are addressing this. Normally, actually, the cash responses, the major obstacle for it in Syria and in the Syrian context is the inability actually to conduct, you can say, partial response or response based on different bases. The major approach of the cash response now, which is taking place in Syria, is, you can say, the blanket one. And for this blanket response, we have a lot of reasons. We have the reason, for example, that we're working in camps environment. We're working with, for example, people almost of same vulnerability. So what is actually in need for capacity improvement is more the referral pathways for both cash and GBV people, and how this is going to be done together, and how the response is going to be for the cases on the different, let's say, eligibility and capacity assessment which is done for the cases. This is one of the areas that we really, as a national partner, are calling for improvement in, and we would like any inputs from the donors actually to improve, to give, let's say, kind of effort to improve this with us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Clearly, this conversation is really taking off, and I'm so sorry to cut us off to respect the time. These conversations are exactly the type of discussions and airing of challenges and sharing potential solutions that we really welcome in the task team space. I've dropped into the chat the website for the task team and also my email. If you're not yet a member, we certainly welcome you to be, and we look forward to picking up this conversation as your work continues through those next steps. If you still have a if you still have a question, Wasim, I see your hand is up. Please email me a question, and then I can direct it to one of the presenters who can then respond. I'm sorry that we're out of time. Please look also at the SOP. The link and the recording will be circulated. I know many colleagues weren't able to make this time, but have requested the recording, so everyone will get that too. And thank you again to our presenters for taking the time to share with us your important work.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Have a great.
Thank you really much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Happy to be back to update on the process within a few months.
Wonderful. Let's make sure to do that. Right. Take care.
Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.